The 2014 VCAA paper was a very difficult paper. So looking at the actual results, you can see the average, or the exams out of 100 marks. So if you average up the mean for every question, which is published in the assessor's comments, you can see that the total is actually only 42 out of 100. That is the mean or average. And what that means is all other scores in terms of your final grade will be based on where were you in relation to the median. So in terms of what did you need to get a certain grade, well, you can see it's quite low up until about a C+. If you got 33% or 33 out of 100, that actually got you a C+, which is obviously much lower than your SAC grades at school. And the reason for that is obviously each SAC is on one topic only, and the exam is just 1 2-hour period where we assess you on all the topics for the entire year. And remember, the total mean or average was 42%. So the first grade that was above that was a B. So to get a B, you had to get 45%. A B plus needed 57, an A needed 68, and an A plus only needed 79, which is one of the lowest scores in recent times to get an A plus. And what that means is a certain percentage of kids got above that, and they were the A plus, and that was a very small percentage of kids got above 79, and that just means it was a difficult paper. So at school, your SAC average, depending on your school, if it was 79%, that would be about a B plus around there. But on the exam, that would have actually got you an A plus in 2014. Looking at the mean score by question is a really good thing to do. So if you look at 1A, the mean was 66%. The average on 1B was 57, 1C was 57, 1D was 42, and so on. And looking at that for each question, it's really good to note a couple of things. First of all, the average usually goes down the longer the exam goes, and that's because by the end of the paper, you've got a lot of students who simply just didn't get to the question. So you're not actually required to answer the questions in order. You don't have to do question 1 first, then 2, and so on. But most people still probably do. And because of that, if you're going to run out of time, it's going to be some of these questions towards the end of the paper. So a good exercise might be to start your revision with some of the questions with the lowest average from last year, and go and look at what they were, because the examiner is going to put some more time into those until the results start to improve. Another interesting thing to look at is the percentage of students who got 0 on each question. So if you look at question 1A, 15% of all students got 0. Question 1B, 20% got 0. 1C was 24, and 29% of students got 0 on 1D. So again, if you go and look at that for each question, again, a good place to start would be some of the questions where the average, 56% of students got 0. So the percentage of students that got 0 where the average is very high. That is a really good place to start your revision. Now again, the questions towards the end of the paper, such as 9B, 9C, and 12, a lot of that would be to do with running out of time. So you'd expect a high percentage of students getting 0. However, this question here was right about in the middle of the paper, question 7. So that might be a good place to go and have a look in last year's exam, start there, and figure out why did students struggle with that question so much. And if you're the examiner is probably going to assess that topic again in a slightly different way until the teachers in the state actually start doing a better job of getting their kids to answer those sorts of questions. Looking at the marks breakdown, so this is based on the classification that we use at our school, which is we have 6 topics in Unit 3, like so. And we allocated marks. So this is going to add up to more than 100 just because I've classified some topics as belonging, some questions as belonging to more than one topic. So I think what's interesting to note is that some topics, such as this one, we don't mean there was no question featuring GST. That was just a topic where we looked at settling GST. So we ever have a GST asset or liability and it's settled. There was actually no question on that. So it's very unlikely that 2 years in a row there would be no question on that. So if you sort of look at trends like that, it's a good way to focus for 2015 and say maybe most likely there's going to be a question on settling GST. You can see some topics have featured quite prominently. So in Unit 3, our topic 6 is balance day adjustments for expenses. There were 12. Preparing financial reports is always going to be a big topic just because it combines a lot of different other topics. And stock cards had 10. and journals and ledgers is probably a bit low. Usually you would expect more questions on actually completing journals and ledgers. Looking at Unit 4, again, a couple of important things to note was very few questions, or actually one question only, and it was buried within a bigger question on disposing of a non-current asset. And also only one question, or part of a question, on balance day adjustments for revenue. So it was actually a prepaid revenue. And it was actually tied in with one of these questions here. But again, because there's only 2 marks for each of those topics in 2014, it's probably likely that they're going to pop up quite a bit in 2015. Interesting to note is that the topic that got the most marks allocated to it was budgeting. That's quite common because budgeting features a lot of other topics sort of embedded within it. Looking at practical and theory, what do we mean by practical and theory? Well, basically, a practical question is any question where you're going to need to write in numbers or have a number in your answer. Whereas theory is a written question. You're going to write or use written expression to answer the whole thing. So theory doesn't necessarily mean qualitative characteristics and accounting principles. It just means you've got lines, and those lines are filled in with writing. And practical, that could be a journal, a ledger, a report, or simply a calculation. So on the 2014 exam, there were 63 marks that were practical and 37 that were theoretical. And generally, the advice is that theory will be somewhere between 30 to 40%, and that was a little at the higher end compared to previous years. Looking at the 10 best questions, so these are questions that were done very, very well. The mean score on each one. So the best question on the paper was question 3B, where the mean score was 83%. So those are questions that have been done very well, and it's not that they won't be on the exam this year. It's maybe that the examiner is happy that they've been taught well and the students have remembered them well. What's probably more interesting to look at is the 10 worst questions. So, just to explain, the blue questions would be practical, and the yellow questions or the yellow bars would be theory. So interestingly enough, 3B was a theory question. That was actually the highest result on the paper. Looking at the 10 worst questions, that's a great place to start your revision. Go through each of these, and they have the lowest averages for the whole state for every question, and figure out why did everybody struggle with each of these questions. Get the examiner's report, look at the answers, look at what the marks are awarded for, and see if you can figure it out. Looking at the marks by question type, the questions get you to do certain things like calculate, complete, explain, prepare, reconstruct, and so on. So by far the biggest was a prepare question, and that would include things like preparing a report, preparing a journal, preparing a ledger, and so on. In terms of theory, explaining something was by far the most sort of the biggest requirement. We expect to see a discuss, maybe an analyse. There was no analyse on this question or evaluate on this exam, sorry, but discuss is equally as detailed for a written question. Looking at the examiner's comments, it's probably a good thing to start there with the previous year's exam and go through what the examiner actually said. So sometimes they say a lot. Obviously, in terms of each question, we'll go through that when we revise every question, but overall, the examiner's comments were mainly about time frame. Most students had trouble fitting this or getting the exam done in the 120 minutes. So a couple of reasons for that. Well, one was you were all asked to complete 12 questions. Now in 2013 it was only 10. So whilst it's still the same amount of marks, you've got to read 12 separate bits of information or case studies. It's a lot to remember, and it no doubt takes more time to do that than to only read 10 little case studies or sets of details. Another way that the examiner identified students wasting time was totaling. So take question 4 for example, where you had to calculate totals in the balance sheet. So a lot of students would spend a lot of time getting those numbers, making sure they all balance, or if they didn't, going back and figuring out exactly where marks were for. Now, if you go through each question, so watch some of the other videos where we actually go through every question one by one, there's actually no marks for totals in that question, in question 4. You didn't actually get any marks whatsoever for any of those numbers in red there. Now, you don't want to assume that's going to be the case this year, but at most, it's usually only 1 mark for all totals. So if you've got a problem with them, it's probably not worth spending 15 minutes trying to figure out where the problem is if you're only going to get 1 mark at best or no marks whatsoever. So maybe don't spend time figuring out why a balance sheet or a ledger doesn't balance until you've actually finished the paper, and then go back and have a look. Another comment was the examiner noted that there was an increase in marks allocated to theory type questions. So we said 37 out of the 100 marks were theory. And also a point was made about, I think that was question 8, interpreting graphs is now very important and expected. So if you go back and look at some of the past exams, go and look at some graph questions, or some, it doesn't have to be a VCAA exam, look at Compact, Insight and so on, and look at graphs and see how you go at answering that sort of question.